Thank you very much. And thank you, Russell. Very typically understated presentation there. I really want to start by seconding Tim O'Reilly's call there that if you haven't looked at the GDS design principles, please do. They are extremely important. The Open Data Institute is a startup. We are 7 weeks old, literally. So I'm going to give you a bit of a snapshot of what we've done in the last 7 weeks. But just to give you some context of where we've come from and how we've arrived here, Sir Tim Berners-Lee and Professor Nigel Shadbolt have been working for years to try and create an institute that will unlock data supply and unlock data demand to create a new ecosystem around open data. We were very fortunate earlier this year and that through technology strategy boards and with the support of the Cabinet Office, we've had £2 million a year commit for 5 years. So that's a £10 million pot, which part of my job is to go and match fund. So I'll be talking to all of you later about helping to fund us going forward. But in terms of the organisation, we have a really important position. We're a non-profit, limited by guarantee company with a very small board at the moment, with Sir Tim as the president and Nigel as the chairman. So this puts us in a really interesting position of not being a government department, not being a private for-profit company, but really to act as a catalyst in the space. And I really want to talk about that sort of catalytic nature. From my perspective, data is the raw material of the 21st century. I think most of us in this room are working on that to some degree. And just want to talk a little bit about the image in the background here. One of the first things that we launched was a Data as Culture art commission, which may seem a bit of a surprising start to what we're trying to achieve here. But I think very much in the spirit of what has been spoken about already today, we see this as part of our cultural development. This isn't just a technical thing, it's not just a commercial thing, it's a really deep thing as part of our cultural development. We didn't give people very long to respond, we gave them 2 weeks. We had 80 responses from 20 countries around the world, with roughly a third, two-third male-female split, with a third from women. And the works that we've commissioned, all bar one, are not screen-based, they're all physical. So again, very much to Russell's point, this is about how do we materialize a lot of this information to make it relevant for our lives. The image in the background here is one of those screen-based pieces. It's a visualization of upper atmospheric meteorological data, and you can come to the ODI next month and have a look at that in situ. I want to go through some examples now of the kind of things that people are doing with data and to try and bring it alive. And I'd encourage you, again, can't really read the URL, unfortunately, on this resolution screen, but the visualization here is of real-time wind data from across the US at the point when the hurricane hit. And so if you look at the site, you can see all the vectors moving in real time. And I think it'd be really interesting to start overlaying the dollar numbers, the $60 billion of damage that were caused by these little vectors of wind motion. As we're starting to instrument our cities, you're seeing more and more dashboards, part of the whole smart cities agenda. We're seeing services like these dashboards emerge, where you can look at the number of borough spikes that are available right now. You can look at the sentiment analysis of the city. Are people on average happy or sad? How many trains are running right now? There's about 7,000 trains, underground trains running, 7,000 buses running right now, and about 340 trains running at the moment. So you can start to pull all of this information to really make us feel part of the infrastructure that we are occupying and inhabiting. Looking at another example here, this very much does what it says on the tin. These are the 8 most frequent diseases of the past 91 days across different countries. This information is starting to become available at scale. We don't just talk about big data. It could be a really small piece of information, actually, that has a huge amount of utility to it. So how can we open up and unlock all of these different data sets? To give some UK examples to bring this home very much to the work that we want to try and catalyse, one of the best examples in the world right now, apart from the work that Government Digital Services is doing, is legislation.gov.uk, where they've unlocked 700 years of our legal knowledge and made that entirely open, linked it all together. You can go and on many different vectors, navigate that space. And they've been working with Pearson to turn that into a commercial model. So another example in terms of public service utility, enabling London bus information to be public, meant 250,000 downloads to a mobile phone app, so you can actually check when the bus is coming. One of the most frustrating things about waiting for a bus. One that I'd like to talk a little bit more about is one of the first companies that we've brought into the ODI to help incubate. And you might say, well, why is a non-profit incubating companies? We're not taking any equity stake, but we are trying to identify organizations and ideas that will demonstrate the future here and catalyze them through mentoring programs, catalyzing them through helping them to get contracts with the private sector or with the public sector, and introduce them and network them with stakeholders that matter. Mastodon is a two-person startup. They both quit their day jobs earlier this year to have a go at creating what we've called clean cloud computing. So as you're very aware, most of the computing world is moving to a cloud services model. Their service enables you to identify which has got the lowest carbon impact. So instead of saying, give me a result in 0.01 of a second, you might say, well, a second is good enough, or actually it might be speed equivalent, but actually I want to have a low carbon technology. And when you look at the impact on data centers, so data centers, 61% of their carbon footprint is their power source. So that starts to raise some really interesting questions. The main question it raises to me is, what's our national energy policy? So how do you make sure that if we're going to build a digital future in the UK where we might want to build a whole range of technical infrastructure and cloud-based services, they're probably not going to be based here unless we have a really good low carbon strategy. Now, fortunately, we do have a very good low carbon strategy, and we need to keep pushing on that. But certainly if you're putting stuff into Amazon Web Services, for example, while they may claim to be very efficient, a lot of their data centers are based in the US where there's coal-fired power stations. So they don't have that level of control over their infrastructure. So there's a very interesting link here between individual developers taking individual action to say, I would like to run some code somewhere that's clean, that has zero carbon, and national energy policy. Those kind of things are really unexpected. I wouldn't have predicted that 10 years ago, but it's starting to emerge as a really core proposition. So coming back to this theme of data as culture, this is another visualization, it's another work that we've commissioned that looks at the, or revisualizes the London map based on the tube time distances. And I think, to me, this kind of spells out that we're starting to refactor how we relate to our space. How do we really take all this information on board in a meaningful way that makes us relate to the spaces that we're in and how we conjoin our physical spaces with our digital spaces and our social spaces. A large part of what the ODI is doing here is to convene different organizations. As I mentioned, we're trying to unlock both supply and unlock demand. On the supply side, we need to work with government, with the public sector, to help them work out what open data principles should be, similar kind of design principles to GDS. We also need to not just unlock the supply. I'm not a believer in if you build it, they will come. I think you also need to go and demonstrate the value. So we need to really unlock a lot of this value, and part of that is to convene different stakeholders. So we have the Open Government Partnership in our space, which is just in Shoreditch. We've got a 5,000 square foot office there. An Open Government Partnership, which is being led by the UK this year, is a consortium of 47 different countries committed to open government. We have My Society, who've done exceptional work in helping to really create a lot of this landscape in the first place. We've got the Open Knowledge Foundation, we've got Open Corporates, and if you don't know of Open Corporates, please do have a look at Open Corporates, because they are reforming the way that we relate to company information. Part of this is redefining business models, and you'll find in a lot of these companies there's a transformation from product-based businesses to service-based businesses, but also the commoditization of the data itself. So you might pay for a service level agreement. You might pay for something if you're going to charge for it. A lot of these companies are providing data for free if you share alike. If the outcome of what you produce, you also share for free. But if you charge, then there's a commercial model around it. As part of our convening power, like I say, we've been going for 7 weeks. We've had an event every day since we started. A couple of weeks ago, we had the MacArthur Research Network here with people from the White House, Tim O'Reilly, Jen Packler from Code for America, MIT Media Lab, really convening some of the world's leaders here in the open data movement. We've also run our own hack events, or what I prefer to call them is innovation festivals, or something that isn't hack, that's a bit more inclusive. It'd be much more interesting to go to a festival than a hack day. But these are really seat-level events where people are coming up with new ideas, and at the beginning of the 36-hour sprint that you do over a weekend, people are not quite sure what to do. One of the things that we've learned is that if we can convene not just developers or engineers are really good at solving problems, but contextualizing what the problems are. So we bring together domain experts with problem statements to say, let's frame this argument, let's frame this problem, and by the end of the weekend, let's try and have some solutions to them. So with the Hack for Health, which we ran a couple of weekends back as well, last weekend actually, we got a whole bunch of great outputs from that, ranging from personal measurements of your own fitness and your own health, through to how do you identify where your local fitness centers are and your local health services are. Really simple services that people are struggling to connect with. We've also worked with local schools, and one of the things I was amazed about here, again very similar to earlier speakers, is if you put kids in a room and let them go play, they come up with some great ideas. So these are school children from a number of different schools, and one of my favorite things they came up with is they looked at the health records of fast food restaurants compared with their names. And if you have the name of the food in the name of your food outlet, you have a much lower health and safety record. So particularly chicken, I think, came off worse than kebabs. So anything with the name chicken in it, probably not worth eating at. We've also worked on personal data. So another innovation event we held was around the My Data initiative. And My Data are all about giving you back your own data. And this is something that is likely to be legislated for. So, for example, energy companies will have to give your information back to you about your energy consumption in a machine-readable format. And the machine-readable format is the really critical bit here. Because once we get it in a machine-readable format, people can build other things on top of that. And it's not just about energy switching, driving the costs down, which tends to create a lot of resistance. It's also about how do you unlock different kinds of innovation around that. So one of the outcomes from that innovation weekend was a personal energy monitor that tied your consumption and behavior patterns into recommended savings, the outcome of which could save you more than 50% of your annual energy costs. And given that that is such a critical part of everybody's household budget, I think it's a really interesting proposition. So just give you a quick overview of the pieces that we're trying to pull together here. And it really is trying to catalyze an evolution. The open data movement is already in flight. What we're trying to do is help to evolve it and catalyze pieces of it. Opening up access is about creating structured, addressable, traceable. So we've got to have the provenance of this information, and sustainable. It's got to have continuity of data supply. If we don't crack those things, we're not really going to create a continuity of service of usable information that innovators and startups can tap into in a reliable way. And one example, there was recently, I think there was a piece in the BBC about the Prime Minister now has an iPad app with a dashboard of country metrics on. Well, of course, the next natural question is, well, where does that data come from, and who wrote the app, and what's the provenance of that? Show me everything underneath that so that we can have the same information that they do. And actually, one of the companies that is providing some of that information is Locatable, who are coming into the Open Data Institute, so we can help them understand what open data principles are and use them. All of this is great, opening up the supply side, opening up the demand side. A core part of our function, therefore, is training and helping people understand what the questions are. And it's not just training the tech level, it's training everybody in that ecosystem, from policymakers to lawyers. You know, training the lawyers is an incredibly important part of what we see here as unlocking the data supply piece. Training, not just in the UK, but also looking internationally. We've had a huge amount of interest over the last 7 weeks from South Korea to Norway to the US, and how we can really coordinate some of the global efforts around here in unlocking data supply. We're holding events. As I mentioned, we've had an event pretty much every day since we launched. And the fourth piece to really kind of make this fly, I think, has to be showcasing the results, communicating out what was the value of this in the first place. In terms of who we are, we've got Sir Tim Berners-Lee as our president, and Professor Nigel Shadbolt as our chairman. Particular shout out to Jenny Tennyson, our technical director, who is one of the architects behind legislation.gov.uk and data.gov.uk. From my point of view, one of the world experts right now on open data itself. You can't really see this, but just in terms of a roadmap, we're right on the left-hand side of this diagram, 7 weeks in. We have a 5-year roadmap to try and grow this organization internationally and have an impact as a world-class leader to help set standards and drive forward innovation in this space. And just to be clear, we define value as economic value, social value, and environmental value. So it's not just looking at economic growth. So just to close off, actually, as it's very much about people. And the reason I put so many photographs in here of individuals in our developing space here is we can create all of the kind of top-level policy pieces, we can create really great statements of intent, but at the end of the day, it is down to a very small number of individuals giving up their weekends or coming into our space or giving up their jobs to really jump forward and take a big step out into how can we make a difference, how can we change things. So I'd really just like to finish with giving them a huge shout out, because it really is, in terms of innovation, it is a very scary thing to go and do. I've been running startups myself for 15 years, and you have to take a leap of faith. And we want to encourage and provide the support network around people to take more bold steps. Thank you very much.